Wandering around the vast Giza plateau can be a bewildering experience, a seemingly endless layering of detail in every direction you look. The first time you visit, it's only really possible to take in the big landmarks, the pyramids, causeways, the Great Sphinx, and the massive granite and limestone structures that are part of those complexes. Subsequent days, or even weeks spent on the plateau, however, will slowly start to unveil the true depth of mystery present in the ancient stonework. At this point, I've spent the equivalent of a few weeks on the plateau myself, and that's but a tiny fraction of the time my good friend and guide Yousef Awyan has spent exploring and investigating the plateau, living his whole life as he has basically across the street from the Sphinx. Even with his incredible depth of experience here, we still find new details and observations each time we visit, often with the aid of the fresh eyes and perspectives of those who visit with us. My name is Ben, and this is UnchartedX, and today I want to share with you one of these more subtle details, something observed in recent visits to the Giza plateau. It's fascinating, and it's a finding that speaks to a broader and much more hotly discussed topic, that of the erosion and the implied age of the stone that makes up these ancient structures. I think there's evidence and reasoning here that only, logically, suggests that some of these structures are far older than their attributed accepted dates of construction, which is somewhere in the 2700 BCE range, the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt. As always, watch the video and make up your own mind as we explore yet another aspect of our shared and mysterious past. Our story begins here at the so-called pyramid or mortuary temple of the Middle Pyramid complex. As mentioned in previous videos, and it's a point always worth repeating, there is far more than just a single pyramid when it comes to the whole construction project that erected them. Each of the mighty stone pyramids, those found at Giza as well as at the other Old Kingdom pyramid sites along the Nile, is part of a unified and integrated complex made up of multiple structures. In the case of the Middle Pyramid complex at Giza, which is all attributed to Pharaoh Khafra of the 4th dynasty, the son of Khufu, it includes the pyramid itself, one of the largest in the world at 143 meters tall, or 471 feet, and weighing in somewhere around 6 million tons. Yet, as large as it is, it only represents a portion of the work involved in the entire complex. I've spent plenty of time in previous videos talking about the gigantic task of preparing the ground for this pyramid, which was built into a slope and involved digging the western side of the enclosure down over 30 feet or 10 meters and building up the eastern side with massive limestone foundation tiles, many in the 1 to 200 ton range, and locking them into each other and the bedrock like some sort of giant 3D jigsaw puzzle. Then there is the giant causeway, nearly a kilometre long and very wide, originally cased and covered with a roof, that connects the massive megalithic structures found at either end of it. At the eastern end, the famous Valley Temple with its mostly intact granite casing stones, the adjacent Great Sphinx, and the Sphinx Temple are all part of this complex. Then, at the western end, there's the Pyramid or Mortuary Temple at the top of the causeway, which is larger than both the Sphinx and Valley Temples, but having been extensively pillaged and damaged, lacks nearly all of its original granite casing stones. While the Valley Temple has, or had, 16 huge upright granite pillars, the Pyramid Temple had 24 of them and a much larger footprint. It's here, in the Pyramid Temple, that we recently found what might be the largest single block on the entire Giza plateau, a roughly 450-ton limestone behemoth, and it was the subject of a recent video. The Pyramid Temple is also the best example of what I'm terming megalithic erosion. The massive stone blocks that make up the internal masonry here show just tremendous levels of erosion. When walking around the remnants of the structure, you often have to look closely to see just where the original surfaces were. These blocks were all, originally, cut and finished with flat faces and square corners. In some places, you can still see where the faces were inset to receive the granite casing stones that covered and interlocked with the limestone core masonry on both the inside and outside of the so-called temple.
And the one on top of it as well shows that. So the temple was encased in and out with granite stone, which we see the ruins of it everywhere.
At the mortuary temple, there are only a few of these granite casing stones still remaining, the vast majority of them having been quarried and taken from the site. To get an idea of what it might have been like, you only need to take a look at the Valley Temple, at the other end of the causeway, which, due to being at a lower elevation, was deeply buried in sand, thus protected from most of the quarrying, and still has the majority of its remarkable casing stones. On the bare southern wall of the Valley Temple, you can observe the same inset pattern in the limestone core masonry, also present at the Pyramid Temple, that allows the granite casing stones to lock into it. This original granite casing would have served another purpose in terms of erosion. It would have effectively protected the limestone core from the elements and effects like wind or sand erosion, presumably for millennia, which makes the level of damage to the stone that we can see here in the Pyramid Temple even more perplexing. Remember these casing stones, as they're an important part in this story. Before we get into specific examples, it's worth explaining a little bit about the restoration and repair work that's been done here by the Ministry of Antiquities over the last century or so, as it's often mistaken for original work. It's even used to suggest a geopolymer origin for some of these blocks. In this case, the geopolymer label happens to be accurate. Cement is a geopolymer, but it's modern work. This entire structure is quite literally falling down due to the erosional damage, and it's been extensively buttressed and repaired in an effort to slow down or halt this process. In some places, it's quite obvious. You can see here the large blocks cemented into place in areas of deep erosional damage. But in others, it's less obvious, as the bricks and blocks have been plastered over with cement, and then that's been textured and painted to look like the surrounding limestone.
Also, look at this one. This is not the stone itself, but they took pieces of the fallen stone and they flattened it on top of the surface, because if you look here from the side, you will see that the erosion was this deep. And it goes in the entire stone.
Yeah, and they filled it in. Yeah.
And they filled it in. Same like here.
Yeah, it's all repair.
Yeah. Why the other blocks don't have it? Because it used to have other course of stone in front. Look here, for example, the Ministry of Antiquities filled the erosion with these blocks of stone. So this is a restoration, because the erosion is severely reflected on the inside.
Once you notice the repair work, you can see just how extensive it is. Not for nothing, but this is also very common to see on the Old Kingdom pyramids, as well as at many other structures. There's been a lot of work done to shore them up. While it's a good thing that the structures are being preserved and prevented from deteriorating further, it's also creating details that aren't really true to the original form. Or in some cases, like that of the basalt pavement to the east of the Great Pyramid, these repairs are forever hiding away details that may reveal more clues about their manufacture and construction. Ultimately, these monuments become something of a facsimile of the original, never really true to it. This process is happening rapidly to the huge statues in places like Karnak and Luxor. The original and lost granite is being replaced by concrete sculpting and paint. Like this statue here that's painted to look like granite. This is something I find somewhat ironic, as the exact same replication and imitation process was going on in pre-dynastic times, when primitive people were painting clay pots to imitate the older and far more remarkable hard stone vases. Today, we're doing the same thing. We're just using cement sculpting and paint to imitate the granite. While I get the need for repairs and support to prevent a wall or a structure from falling, like the work that's been done at the Pyramid Temple, I'm not really a fan of trying to recreate or replicate something that is already in pieces. I'd much prefer that we display the pieces and let our imagination and minds do the work. The great head of one of these statues in front of Luxor Temple was far more interesting when it was on the ground, enabling a close inspection. But if you want to see it today, it's over 30 feet up in the air, crowning a comparatively rough concrete facsimile of the original piece. Although it does make for a nice photo from a distance, and I don't think that most regular tourists are going to notice the differences between the modern concrete and the original flawless granite, I'm not sure it's ultimately a good thing. It's one of the reasons that I was pleased to hear that the proposed project to rebuild the granite casing of the third pyramid at Giza was halted. You know it was never going to look like it originally did, and concrete would have been used extensively. I'm all for mapping out the stones and trying to digitally reconstruct it, but we're never going to get it back together exactly right, so, in my opinion, the details of this structure should be left as they are, authentic. I really do wish they'd have kept on digging that hole though. Clearing off its original base and exposing the bedrock foundation would enable us to learn volumes about this incredible structure. Returning to the Pyramid Temple at Giza and the topic of erosion, a good example of it is this large notch that's been carved across several blocks in the central structure. The full extent of the erosion isn't visible today as it's been repaired with concrete at one end. And in other places in the temple, it seems clear that similar erosive notches in the stone have been filled with blocks and concrete. A great example of the damage this erosion has caused over time can be seen at the front of the structure, where it connects with the long causeway running down in elevation to the Sphinx and Valley Temple, and where there are still just a few of the granite casing stones in place. These casing stones would have, originally, entirely covered the huge front wall and entrance of the temple. The megalithic limestone masonry behind, or rather in between, these granite blocks, as the walls here were also cased on the inside, have been so badly eroded that the stack of them has just toppled over, due to nothing more than erosion. These are no small stones that could be easily dislodged, roughly 11 meters long and more than 2 meters wide, yet the accumulated erosive force over time was enough for them to eventually fall. The block that was originally on top of the one that we're examining here today lies in front of it.
And then I noticed the roof. As you can see, the casing stone here, that used to encase the entire temple.
Yeah.
Just like the Valley Temple down there. And as we mentioned before, that this block here
Fell.
fell. It used to be on top of this one here.
Yeah, and some people think this is like evidence for some sort of ramp, or they were taking blocks here, but this actually fell. It's a stupid idea,
This is according to his YouTube research. But we see the height of the lower block. This is a separate block from that one, and they are separated right here. And we can see the line of erosion. The original width of the block is from
there.
here until here, of course.
Yeah.
And the same for the one that fell.
Yeah.
So as we can see, the deterioration kept eroding and eroding until they could no longer support each other.
And it fell. Yeah.
Just by realizing that, I looked at the rest of the structure, and you can see the entire structure is actually falling apart, not from recycling,
From erosion.
from erosion.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's crazy.
It is. Well,
It looks really old.
It does seem quite old. Yes,
We,
that's.
of course, need more investigation about this, but it's not hard, because if you compare the other stones that were exposed, and we realized that the difference in stone masonry
Yeah.
down there in the Valley Temple, the same quality of stone is over there, and it was exposed. It was not even under a casing stone of granite.
Another thing I've heard said is that perhaps the structure was built with already eroded blocks, an idea that I really don't think holds much merit. Erosional patterns in the stone are consistent from one block to another, as we've just seen, and this is clearly the result of this same effect over time working on the structure. We can also see the finished nature of some blocks that were protected from erosion by other parts of the structure, and to me it's quite clear that these were all originally cubic or rectangular blocks with flat faces and square corners.
Yeah, the erosion and how it's connecting between the two blocks.
Yeah, it does. It's a strange erosion.
Of stones above and behind, which used to have another course of stone on top of it or in front of it, was not exposed. So we cannot say that the stone was already eroded or something like that.
Right.
The stone eroded, of course, after it was built.
Yeah.
And look at all the filling that was created by the Ministry of Antiquities. The entire temple. No exaggeration. All around. It was not just one softer block that was eroded. This entire section that is filled with smaller blocks of stone and then a layer of coating of cement
To make it look like old limestone.
Look how eroded. Look at this.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. And this isn't, and it's not soft stone either. This is hard.
We all know the toughness of the
Nummulitic limestone.
calcified.
Limestone.
Yes, it's not a soft stone, no. So it's all around, on both sides. If you look at the entire temple, these stones are in that position because of the erosion. So these used to be perfectly cubic, perfectly flat surfaces. And also you can see behind it the reinforcement that the Ministry of Antiquities built to prevent it from falling, which is this reinforcement here. It's built from smaller blocks and then coated with a layer of cement to make it look like the ancient stone. And the same case is over here. All these parts has reinforcement underneath. So imagine you look at a temple that it is collapsing literally because of weathering.
Another observation that I've often heard made is that the erosion in places looks like it was caused by water, and not just rainfall, but even wave or current action. We'll get into the scientific details of water erosion on limestone a little later in the video, and while I can understand the observation based on the shape of some of this erosion, there are a few issues with the idea. It's certainly possible that at some point, many thousands of years ago, sheet floods or the like might have come across the Giza plateau, and in fact there's strong evidence for floods at least in the lower parts of the plateau, even some records of them happening during the Old Kingdom. At the bottom of the plateau, the lower end of the causeway, the Valley Temple is thought to have functioned as a harbour during the annual inundation of the Nile. In fact, a new scientific paper came out in May 2024 that suggests these structures were on the original banks of a now extinct branch of the Nile River, named the Aramat branch. Interestingly, this branch only existed when the North African Sahara Desert was a savanna-like environment, with large river systems and lake basins, and ultimately a lot more water, meaning a much wider river with branches like the Aramat being hydrologically possible. This period, where the Sahara Desert was in fact a savanna, stretches back to more than 12,000 years ago, and it ended somewhere between 5,500 and 5,000 years ago, 3,500 to 3,000 BCE roughly, in the late Holocene. This is many centuries before the dating of the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, which is somewhere around 2,700 BCE. So why would the Old Kingdom Egyptians build a harbour here? Nearby to the Valley Temple, the impressive and megalithic Wall of the Crow, which is at a similar elevation, may well have functioned as some sort of water barrier or hydrological control point. Again, it seems strange that we're seeing features here on the plateau that appear to be designed for a water system that simply didn't exist during the established time frame for the Old Kingdom. Although it's possible water reached this level during the annual inundation of the Nile during those times, it would have been far less than the level of the water during the Savannah period, when the Aramat branch of the Nile was some 260 metres wide, or 853 feet. There's something else going on here. Let's also not forget that Zahi Hawass himself dropped a core drill down in front of the Sphinx Temple, which is in this so-called harbour area. He drilled down something like 16 metres or 52 feet, and he hit red granite, which is not a natural part of the limestone plateau, and he reported this in his paper, The Discovery of the Harbours of Khufu and Khafre. This is clearly evidence for something underground, and the remnants of this drilling experiment can still be seen if you take a walk out in front of the Sphinx Temple. So, while individual floods are certainly possible, I have a little more trouble with the idea that large bodies of water might be responsible for the erosion that we see at the other, higher end of the causeway, as it's a different story when we climb up to the level of the pyramids. As mentioned, the plateau has a distinct slope up to the west, and at the top end of the causeway, the level of the pyramids, you're at a significantly higher elevation than the Nile Valley and surrounding desert. Up here, you stand at a height above the head of the Sphinx, and you can look out across the Nile Valley that modern Cairo is built in. Single sheet floods or rainfall events alone are unlikely to have caused the erosion that we can see at the Pyramid Temple, even if they reach this level. Suggesting that there was flowing water running up here for any significant length of time would have meant a truly enormous body of water. Something else, other than single events, must be responsible for the severe erosional features on display, and I think that it's most likely time and natural processes. This brings us to one of the major contradictions to be found on the Giza Plateau, something I've noticed and researched in the last couple of years, and the topic I hinted at in the introduction. That is, that not everything labelled as 4th or 5th dynasty shows this sort of erosional damage. In fact, a lot of the less famous structures on the plateau are, quite frankly, in great shape. Take the Western Cemetery, for example. Located to the west of the Great Pyramid and attributed to Pharaoh Khufu, these 4th dynasty structures are at the exact same elevation as the Pyramid Temple of the Middle Pyramid. They're made from exactly the same type of nummulitic limestone, and just look at the surfaces of these blocks, only a hint of erosive damage. The structures of the Western Cemetery were all supposedly made by essentially the same people as those who made the Pyramid Temple. In fact, going by the Orthodox timeline, this area is supposedly older than the structures on the Middle Pyramid, as Khufu was the father of Khafre. Not only that, but these were never cased in blocks of protective granite, as were the limestone blocks of the Pyramid Temple. So, we're looking at the same stone, at the same elevation level, made by the same people at roughly the same time, all without protective granite casing, yet we only see a bare fraction of the level of damage from erosion. This doesn't make much sense to me, but it only gets more confusing as we expand our search.
So, this is here the best example. Because we have two in front of each other. The one that reflects a deteriorated surface, it was extracted like that.
So
And
this
it was never flattened.
Ah,
So it still has the face of the mountain as they extracted it.
right.
So this is the weathering of the mountain itself
Oh, I see.
before they flatten it.
Yeah, okay.
So all this was removed.
Yeah, I
This
can
is
see
the
that.
part that is not removed. هات يا حبيبي القلب.
Habibi.
So you see,
So yeah, this is
these ones is the natural surface that they extracted without flattening.
yeah. So they didn't finish this. They were gonna, and they were working on flattening this, and then you have
And you have the flattened one,
yeah.
right, like this one. And this was also from day one exposed.
So this is all 4th dynasty,
Yeah,
part of the pyramid complex,
of course, this is part of the pyramid city.
the pyramid city, right?
Yeah. So you can see the stone masonry is beautiful.
Yeah, it's lovely.
That's why we always say we don't want to underestimate the dynastic Egyptians.
Right.
Like a beautiful stone masonry. It lasted for thousands of years.
Yeah.
But this is finished. When we look at something like that, that is also eroded because it was never finished. It was never flattened.
Yeah, you can see that. So this was flattened here.
Yeah, this one is flattened. The rest, this was the erosion of the mountain itself.
When they,
Just, yeah, when they extracted. The other ones is the ones that got finished after construction. So this was finished in the Old Kingdom days. And here it is. This
Yeah.
is the same. We're looking at this example because this is the same type of stone that we looked at the interior over there. This is exactly the same because it's coming from here, from the bedrock here. And as you can see. here
Yeah,
it
it's
is.
nicely
Yeah,
not
it's right
eroded.
there.
Yeah.
Now, look how it looks like it is thousands of years old. But the level of erosion
It's not the same.
is not the same. Here we see this erosion. This is the erosion of the rocks itself before they flatten the surface. The other one we know that it was built and it was indented to have
Yeah.
the casing stone of the granite, and then the erosion happened
Yeah.
after the granite stone was removed.
Here are some of the limestone structures in the tombs and mastabas to the south of the Great Causeway. Again, we see the same thing. Limestone blocks of Old Kingdom work which were never cased in granite and still in quite good condition. They're lacking severe erosional features. Here's the difference that you might have already noticed. These Old Kingdom structures are, quite obviously, of a different construction style to the more megalithic work. The blocks are much, much smaller, and the masonry work is still quite linear and fine. The severe erosion is found only on the more megalithic structures, the ones that use huge stone blocks and those that are often cased in granite. At the higher exposed levels of the Valley Temple, we can find similar erosive damage in its limestone blocks. You can see the same thing in the Sphinx Temple, which is stripped of all but a handful of its original granite casing stones. The now exposed south face of the Great Pyramid, viewable after they removed the boat museum, can now be seen up close, and what's left of the casing stones here show severe erosional damage. Several feet of the tough Tura limestone has been eaten away, and extensive modern repairs have been made in this area. Even here, in the core masonry at the northeastern corner of the Great Pyramid, there is a bedrock section that happens to be carved from a natural flint nodule, which is one of the hardest types of rock and used to carve granite and other hard stones. This flint section, part of the natural bedrock, was carved as an integrated piece of the Great Pyramid. It seems to show significant wear and damage, although it is possible some of this damage might have occurred as the result of the quarrying or removal of the casing stones and outer layer. This comparison of the erosive damage that's found between the smaller blocked, less sophisticated structures and the larger megalithic and often far more complex buildings is not just limited to the Giza plateau. It's a phenomenon viewable in plain sight on many of the Old Kingdom pyramid sites in Lower Egypt. At Saqqara, severe erosion is visible on the massive casing stones of the Winis pyramid. Yet, the step pyramid, made from similar limestone, but of much smaller blocks, lacks any evidence for significant erosion, and it is, at least in the Orthodox timeline, considered to be much older. This, at least to my mind, presents a significant conundrum to the Orthodox timeline. We have here a case of structures all, according to that timeline, built around the same time period, from the same stone, by the same people, in some cases at exactly the same elevation level, and presumably subject to the same natural erosive forces that occur over millennia. Yet anyone with a pair of eyes attached to a brain can witness the obvious and distinct differences in erosional damage to the larger, more megalithic works, which, in many examples, were also protected from said forces, likely for millennia, by huge blocks of granite. It just doesn't make sense in the context of the established timeline, but it does begin to make sense if we hypothesize that the megalithic structures are in fact considerably older than the smaller block work of the Old Kingdom. I've said many times that the history of construction and even destruction of the sites in ancient Egypt is far longer and more complex than is readily apparent to the eye, and that's certainly true at the Giza Plateau. I think there were many different periods of construction, renovation, repair, spanning thousands of years, and followed by many more centuries, if not millennia, of destruction and quarrying. Who's to say exactly what was here when the ancient Egyptians established their great necropolises of Giza or Saqqara? There is no doubt that they were here. They built on these sites, and they certainly left their mark. Whether or not they truly possess the capability to build structures like the Pyramid Valley and Sphinx temples, made with mind-bending precision and sophistication, as well as single blocks of stone weighing in at over 400 tons, or whether they were even capable of building the pyramids themselves, I'm highly skeptical. Based on the archaeological evidence, what they wrote, the scenes on the walls that they drew, and the tools that we found, there is very little evidence to support it. There are no scenes on any walls showing stone pyramid building, nor of the logistics that are involved with moving 400 plus ton blocks of stone. But we do have scenes of other, more primitive construction activities. Scenes of woodworking, of using sticks, rocks and sand to shape alabaster vessels, and of them making mud bricks, presumably for ramps or perhaps even to make the mud brick pyramids of the Middle Kingdom. The tools that have been found in the archaeological record are primitive. They can't explain the machining and cutting witness marks that are still found on megalithic architecture, nor the precision and sophisticated geometry of blocks and artifacts made from very hard stone. What we can see here is a tale of two industries. One that is relatively primitive, understandable and explainable by the tools we found and the scenes that have been carved on walls by ancient Egyptians, and another that is far more mysterious, sophisticated, complex, precise, and megalithic, with no evidence suggesting that the dynastic Egyptians possessed the tools, knowledge, or capability to create it. Before we move on to the scientific research into limestone erosion, a quick note to let you know that this video is being brought to you by my amazing supporter community and the value for value model. I want to extend a huge thank you to those who support UnchartedX on Patreon, YouTube channel memberships, Subscribestar and Locals, as well as those who support me directly through PayPal, Venmo or my PO box. I don't do sponsorship deals on this channel, despite daily offers in amongst the endless spam that comes with having a public email address. I also much prefer to operate under the value for value model, and if you get some value from my work, please consider returning some of that value to me, whatever it means to you, in time, talent or treasure. Whether it's the price of a cup of coffee or a monthly subscription, it's all greatly appreciated. My new channel intro is a result of this model, as are many of the graphics in my logos, and I really couldn't continue to deliver this sort of niche content without the support of the wonderful people who choose to support me for a couple of bucks a month. As, let's face it, these types of semi-autistic long deep dives into esoteric topics are never going to be as popular as the shorter, brain-dead reaction content that's so prolific on the platform. I do my best to provide channel benefits to the UnchartedX supporter community with direct communication, early access to new videos, a yearly sticker and merch mail out as a thank you, early access to register for upcoming tours, as well as providing supporter-only resources, photo galleries, as well as Q&As and video content when I can. Again, many thanks to those who support me. I'm forever grateful. And if you're interested in supporting UnchartedX via the value for value model, you can find all the details at unchartedx.com/support. Now, if you're interested in coming to Egypt with me to visit sites like the Giza plateau and see some of these things for yourself, I will be going back to ancient Kemet in December of 2024, as I'll be joining Yousef Awyan on his annual Primordial Egypt tour. December 4th to 17th, we'll be touring Upper and Lower Egypt, including a 4-night Nile cruise, always a good time, as well as special permission visits to the Sun Temple of Abu Ghurab, the Old Kingdom site of Abu Sir, and a 2-hour private visit inside the Great Pyramid with all chambers open. If you're interested in checking it out, you can take a look at the post on my website or via the link below in the description for the full itinerary, pricing, and sign-up details. Back to the video. So, now that we've established the difference between legitimately 4th dynasty structures, the smaller block work, and the more megalithic structures, let's return to the topic of erosion into limestone. Just how long might it have taken for this level of damage to occur in this hard sedimentary rock? We aren't limited to just guesswork here, as there have been quite a number of scientific studies done with the aim of determining erosion rates into limestone under various conditions. I want to acknowledge and thank a good friend and teacher of mine, Randall Carlson, for sharing a lot of this data with me. I have a longer discussion with him on my channel that focuses on the erosion of the Sphinx enclosure, so if you're interested in getting into more details in the way that only Randall can, The link to that discussion is below in the description, but I'm going to cover the main points of these studies here. As a general rule of thumb for our calculations, I'm going to use 2 feet of erosional damage, or 60.96 centimeters, rounded up to 61. There are many places where there is at least 2 feet of erosion damage into the stone. The 11-meter long block wall that's fallen over is one of them. Another are the blocks in the central internal structure of the pyramid temple, as well as those of the temple structure at the third pyramid of Menkaure. Much of the modern repair work was similarly done in places where there's been at least 2 feet of the stone eaten away by erosion. The Sphinx enclosure itself is another example. Given that this was originally a quarry and would have had, when it was quarried, a slightly stepped profile due to the blocks being cut, there has been even more than 2 feet of erosive damage done to these bedrock limestone walls. So, in my opinion here, 2 feet or 61 centimeters is an adequate baseline. Let's look at high-energy erosive environments first, as there is plenty of limestone found in rivers or in coastal and intertidal zones around the world that have been studied, like these with the typical notches carved from wave action in Malaysia. The shore rocks of Point Perrin, which is near Perth in Western Australia, were studied by Ernest P. Hodgkin, and his findings reported in a paper titled Rate of Erosion of Intertidal Limestone in the Annals of Geomorphology, published in 1964. The limestone notch that was studied by Hodgkin at Point Perrin actually faces inshore, and it was sheltered from the full impact of the waves, but it's still a high-energy erosive environment given the 24/7 nature of water action working on the stone. Stainless steel rods were driven into the rock at 3 levels, and casts were made of the rock surface, including the rods, when they were placed there in August of 1953. Casts were again taken in February of 1956 and once again in January of 1962. The amount of rock lost due to wave and water action was measured by comparing the profiles of the casts. Quoting from Hodgkin's paper, quote, "From these data it is evident that there was progressive erosion over the whole of this nearly vertical rock surface, but that rate differed greatly with level. It was highest at the lowest level and decreased rapidly above this. The highest rods are above high water mark, except sometimes in winter, but must normally be wetted daily by waves and splash. The lowest rods are a little above mean sea level and are covered daily, except occasionally. At this level, the mean rate of erosion was 1 millimeter per year, a figure that again is very close to estimates from limestone shores elsewhere." End quote. So, from Hodgkin's paper, the highest rate of erosion, which was found at the lowest rods, just above mean sea level, that was measured over 11 years, was 1 millimeter per year. Again, this was the fastest measured rate of erosion. The higher rods, still affected by water action, showed far less. If we bust out the trusty Windows calculator, not that we really need it for this, and using our 2 feet of erosion seen at Giza, which is, again, 610 millimeters, at a rate of 1 millimeter per year, that's 610 years of sea level wave action to erode 2 feet of limestone. The problem, obviously, is that it seems, let's just say, unlikely or implausible that the pyramid temple at the top of the causeway at Giza was covered in moving wave action water for more than 600 years at any point across the last 5,000. Hodgkin referenced another study in his paper, one done by Emery in 1941, which was a direct estimate of intertidal erosion based on dated inscriptions carved into the limestone sea cliffs at La Jolla, California. His results came in at roughly 1 foot of erosion across 600 years, which works out to 0.5 millimeters per year. This is half the measured rate of Hodgkin's paper, giving us a figure of roughly 1,200 years of wave action to wear away 2 feet of limestone. This 1,200-year figure matches the results from an Army Corps of Engineers experiment, which was started in 1912, when they constructed a navigation dike by placing large limestone boulders midstream in the Tennessee River at Watts Bar. As reported by Portland P. Fox in the Journal of the Tennessee Academy of Science, Volume 16, published 1941, when the Army Corps constructed the second stage of this cofferdam, enclosing and unwatering the dike some 27 years later, a close examination of the limestone boulders was possible. Here is Randall Carlson discussing the results.
So here, the bottom line is this: approximately 1/2 inch in 25 years. Okay, so 25 years, this is water flowing continuously. So this is another high-energy erosional environment, flowing continuously over these blocks. So 25 years, that's going to be 8. So 1/2 inch, if we're going to, move 1/2 inch in 25 years and we've got 2 feet, well, then you've got 48 times 25, or 1,200 years of water continuously flowing over these limestone blocks.
So 1,200 years for 2 feet of limestone erosion in an extremely high-energy erosive environment. What about other forms of erosion in more normal environments, not subject to rivers or waves from the sea? Well, we happen to have a lot of limestone that's been conveniently accurately dated when it was carved, in the forms of headstones in cemeteries and other monuments with names and dates carved into the rock surface. Thomas C. Merdling wrote a paper for Volume 6 of the Geomorphology Journal in 1996 titled Inscription Legibility Method for Estimating Rock Weathering Rates. Quoting from his paper, "Many monuments, buildings and rock surfaces have names and dates carved into them, and these inscriptions become less legible in a quantitatively predictable manner as adjacent rock face recedes." End quote. In his paper, Merdling reports that the vertical faces of limestone monuments in Louisville, Kentucky, receded at a rate of 0.5 millimeters per 100 years. This weathering is caused by, weather, and to put it into comparison with Egypt, the average annual rainfall for Louisville is 47.6 inches, or 1,209 millimeters per year. In Cairo and on the Giza plateau, the average annual rainfall is a couple of orders of magnitude less, at 28 millimeters per year, or just over an inch. Using that rate of limestone erosion, 0.5 millimeter per 100 years, or 1 millimeter every 200 years, in an environment with Louisville's average rainfall, 2 feet or 610 millimeters of weathering would take approximately 122,000 years in those conditions. Another study by J.G. Goodchild in the Geological Magazine of October 1890 also studied the rate of limestone tombstone erosion due to weathering and solution in rainfall, and I'll let Randall Carlson deliver the quote from the paper.
This is way back from 1890. The weathering of certain limestones deduced from the observed extent of waste that had affected some dated tombstones. Here we had stones that had been carved out of solid, unweathered limestone at a given date recorded upon the tombstone itself, and side by side with the date was given by the hand of nature a fairly exact record of the amount of limestone that had been carried away in solution from the general surface of each of the tombstones in question. The mean of several observations gave as the rate of solution about 1 inch in 500 years.
At Goodchild's measured rate of 1 inch in 500 years, given that there's 24 inches in 2 feet, that comes out at 12,000 years to erode 2 feet of limestone. And there's even more. F.J. North in 1930 reported on experiments ran by the United States Bureau of Standards to ascertain the solubility of limestone in water in a report titled Limestones, Their Origins, Distribution and Uses. The Bureau placed 2-inch cubes of rock on the roof of their building in Washington, D.C. Quote, "After careful weighing spread over a period of about 7 years, it was found that from exposure to the weather, an oolitic limestone would lose a layer about 1 millimeter in thickness in 100 years. The loss from a compact crystalline limestone was about 1/3 less." End quote. Washington, D.C.'s average annual rainfall clocks in at 41.79 inches per year, or 1,061 millimeters. In this environment, 610 millimeters or 2 feet of limestone would take 61,000 years to disappear. Bear in mind that they also found the harder forms of limestone, which are like those predominantly used in megalithic buildings at Giza, erode at a rate about 1/3 less, which means it would take something like 80,000 years for 2 feet of erosive damage. It is worth mentioning here, as hinted at in this paper, that not all limestones are the same. Even different sedimentary layers in the same rock structure will have different levels of hardness, and this has been extensively documented in the Sphinx enclosure as well as on the body of the Sphinx itself. The majority of the limestone that makes up the huge megalithic blocks of the pyramid structures and of the pyramids themselves is a very hard form of nummulitic limestone. There is softer limestone that's been used in some other places, something that I think is likely evidence of renovation and rebuilding in later periods, but that's a topic for another video. So, in summary, scientific research has shown that in coastal wave action environments, 2 feet of limestone erosion would take somewhere around 610 to 1200 years. In rivers, the measured rate for 2 feet of erosion was similarly around 1200 years. In more normal weather environments, studies have shown that it would take anywhere from 12,000 years to 61,000 years, even 122,000 years to wear away 2 feet of limestone. And these were all measurements taken in places that have over 40 inches of rainfall per year, versus the desert environment of Egypt's typical 1 inch or less, barely a sprinkle, although I have to say that I have personally witnessed it rain in Cairo a couple of times. If significant rainfall contributed to the erosion that we see on the megalithic structures at Giza and the other Old Kingdom pyramid sites, then when did that happen? It certainly doesn't seem to have been any time in the last several millennia. Quoting B.W. Sparks from page 332 of the journal Geomorphology, published 1960.
Although stream floods and sheet floods may be effective agents in the formation of semi-arid landforms, many deserts bear the imprint of even more significant water action. It seems very doubtful whether the required amount of water ever falls in present conditions, which is exactly right. And many authorities have attributed such erosion to a wetter period during the Pleistocene. For example, the valley on the west side of the Nile at Luxor, containing the tombs of the kings, appears to be a water-eroded valley. But the tombs themselves show no signs of destructive water action. This means that water action of any significance probably ceased at least 4,000 years ago.
Looking at the evidence and scientific studies, if rainfall or water had anything to do with the erosive damage found on these ancient megalithic sites, it must follow that they've been there for a very long time indeed, stretching back into periods where they were subject to intense rainfall, into the Pleistocene, and even then they had to be subject to that weathering for many thousands of years, and this is all after the protective granite casing stones had been dislodged. And here we again return to show one of the huge contradictions in plain sight at the monuments of ancient Egypt. If not water or rainfall, then what caused this erosion? It's wind and sand, Ben, I hear the skeptics ranting. Wind and sand. Well, okay, I'm sure wind and sand erosion has something to do with it, but then why don't we see evidence for all this wind and sand erosion on all the other established and uncontroversial 4th Dynasty structures that are made with smaller blocks of limestone? Ones that were never cased in protective granite. The wonderful works in the Western Cemetery, or the tombs and mastabas found to the south of the causeway, or many of the other examples that are all still in great shape with very little erosion. The fact is, there just isn't any legitimate, logical explanation for what we see at Giza under the established Orthodox timeline. If you insist that the megalithic works of the Pyramid Temple or the other significantly eroded structures like the Sphinx and Valley Temple, even the remaining lower casing of the Great Pyramid itself, are just as old as everything else at Giza, then there are 2 questions to answer. 1. How is the erosion so severe in so short a time in such an arid environment? Today's desert climate in Egypt is basically the same as it was during the time of the dynastic Egyptians. And 2, why don't we see similar erosion on the other smaller block structures that are made from the same stone by the same people, found at the same elevation level, exposed to the same weathering as the megalithic structures? You know, the ones that were also cased in protective granite blocks for presumably millennia. This paradox only begins to make sense when you consider the possibility for much longer timelines for the larger megalithic work. Is it possible that these incredible stone creations have been standing here for far longer, and that it was only later, thousands of years later, that the dynastic Egyptians of the Old Kingdom moved into this site and created their great necropolis, buried their dead, and used the location for ceremonial, ritualistic purposes? Beyond the technological evidence for sophisticated tools and logistics in the megalithic work, beyond the massive technological delta between the two construction styles shown in my Tale of Two Industries, beyond the cultural evidence from what the ancients themselves said, Zep Tepi and the 40,000-year-long King's List, and beyond the evidence for true cataclysm with the Younger Dryas, there happens to be some written evidence at Giza that suggests exactly this scenario. In a small underground rock-cut tomb at Giza, which was likely never originally a tomb, there are some Old Kingdom inscriptions that have a very interesting implication.
And this is the name of it. Affect Mer. And then Mer means the overseer of the Pyramid. And that's another subject.
That is to give evidence that the Old Kingdom didn't build the pyramid. They built what? The Pyramid City.
The Pyramid City, which is all the what surrounded that structure.
Right. That's what they mean. So they built
Exactly.
surrounding.
Like in modern times, we have a neighborhood, we call it the Gardens of the Pyramid. Something similar. Okay, so in 2,000 years later, we cannot claim that who built that neighborhood is the builder of the pyramids. But they just built a town or a city as it is written there.
Huh.
And the name of that pyramid, Mennefer, the one on the top, that is the reason that they call it Memphis later.
Yeah.
Right, comes from
Yes,
that's what
Mennefer, then transferred to Memphis.
So they didn't build the pyramid, then they came here and they settled in that location and then they built
the city.
Not everything from scratch, but they built also more on a much older structure. And it happens that this word right here, Khen-Tish, with that sign of a foreign land, means, this is one word from 4 symbols here, and it means settler. That's what this word means.
Settlers.
Yes.
Not builders, but settlers.
Not settlers.
Yeah.
Yes, and there used to be priesthood responsible for the settlers who was coming northerly from the south and settled in the New Mer or the Pyramid City.
The overseer of the Pyramid City. Interesting. As always, I encourage everyone to dive into the details, evaluate the evidence, and to make up your own mind. Is what I'm saying here 100% right? I'm certainly not claiming that, but I'm trying to follow the evidence to where it leads, with an open mind, and I think that I'm asking some legitimate questions pertaining to the established timeline of civilization, questions that I don't believe have been answered within that context. I hope that the disciplines of archaeology and Egyptology can continue their very slow progress towards becoming a true multidisciplinary field, and embrace new technology, evidence and data, and perhaps even one day eventually loosen their death grip on the idea that civilization itself only ever began once on this planet a mere 6,000 years ago. I think, at this point, that there is such a weight of evidence, both inside the field and coming in from adjacent sciences, that we can begin to civilly and seriously discuss the possibility that our past is both longer and more complex than we ever imagined. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and again, many thanks to my supporter community. I know that it's been a while since I've uploaded, but these videos take a lot of time and effort in research, writing, and production, and I try to keep a high standard. I've been at this one for quite a while, and it's taken a little bit of my soul with it, trust me. I do have a second channel, UnchartedX Live, that features other content and stream highlights if you want to check it out. If you want to help me produce more videos like this one, or the others that you can find on my channel, please consider visiting unchartedx.com/support. And I'll catch you all in the next one.